Good afternoon, everyone. Today I'm chatting with Wojtek Wodzicki from NGEX Exploration. In today's interview, we get into Argentina and what investors should be thinking about when considering the investing climate that exists within the country of Argentina. We also get into some of the discoveries that NGX made. And guys, I don't think that there is a stock out there that has provided more value for shareholders over the last 5 years than what Wojtek has done for his shareholders over at NGX. So I get into some questions about how you as a retail investor can try to identify companies like NGX that are able to go and make big discoveries and make big money as shareholders. So he gives us some insights into those types of things that we should be looking for. All right, everybody, enjoy the interview. Wojtek, thanks for joining us.
Very nice to be here, Steve.
So it's the first time we've had you on, but I thought we could maybe start talking a little bit about what it's like to operate in Argentina. There's obviously um, challenges that you have. I know with some of the companies I've chatted with that operate in Argentina, my understanding is that there's basically two currencies in Argentina. One that the locals use, but you can't use for in terms of like foreign exchanges, and then another one that is sort of like the foreign exchange currency. What's that like operating in Argentina? Do you find that that's an advantage for you guys being a Canadian domiciled company that operates in Argentina? Maybe you can give us some color on that.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that we're probably one of the most experienced international exploration companies in Argentina. So NGX Minerals is part of the Lundin group of companies, and in various forms, um, the group and NGX itself has operated in Argentina for more than 30 years, and so we've operated through thick and thin, and various governments, and we've operated successfully in all sorts of conditions. So we don't see a particular issue with operating there, and we've never had particular difficulty operating in Argentina. I think sometimes some of the external optics are quite different than what actually operating in the country is like. And the currency regime that you're describing is actually a little bit different than what you've described. It's not that there are two different currencies. It's just that there's for the last couple of years there have been exchange controls, and so the currency has been fixed at a particular exchange rate, and that's not necessarily a market rate. And so there are, where people talk about two different rates. There's what you might call a free market rate, and then there's kind of the official exchange rate. And over the last a couple of years ago, there was quite a significant gap between those two rates, the fixed rate, official rate, if you want to call it that, versus the free market rate. That gap has shrunk substantially in the last year and a half since a new government came to power about a year and a half ago, and the gap between the official exchange rate and the free market rate has shrunk from, it's been over 100% at times in the past to, I think it's less than 10% now. And in fact, there's just recently, I think yesterday, there was an announcement the government plans to eliminate those exchange controls and move towards a free floating currency, just like many other countries have. So I mean, it hasn't been a particular problem for us operating in the past, and I think with all of the changes that the new government has made, it's only going to get easier and more similar to operating anywhere.
If I could maybe step away from mining for a second and just ask you about, you mentioned Javier Milei, who has obviously been a pretty controversial figure out there and the way that he's handled stuff and handled government. I'm just curious, to the extent that you're comfortable talking about it. I assume that you are chatting with staff in Argentina. You spend a bit of your time in Argentina.
Sure.
What's the temperature there like in terms of how people feel about this new government do you think that it has improved the country since Milei's come in? I think most people around the world would view him as a bit of a radical. What's your kind of view from just spending time in Argentina and talking with your staff there?
Yeah, I definitely like to stay away from politics, especially in a country that I'm not, that we're guests in. But I think and I was just there 2 weeks ago. So, and I've worked in Argentina, for almost 20 years now. So I'm pretty familiar with the country. I'm a fluent Spanish speaker, and I've worked down there for quite a long time. And like I said earlier, we've been comfortable through thick and thin, and I think our operations have been successful. We've been very successful there, through all sorts of governments. And in fact, I think it's our job to just figure out a way to work with whoever's in power. That said, I think President Milei is, he's taken on a big challenge. Argentina was I think feeling, and experiencing big economic challenges that weren't, that were things that built up, I think, over a long period. And so, um, he came in, I think, with, he's quite a good communicator. He came from kind of I guess, more of a sort of a think tank pundit background. And, I think just like maybe a lot of politicians around the world, you say stuff that, maybe sounds controversial. It's how you get yourself noticed. And I think he did some of that, and I think that contributed to maybe that view of him externally that you mentioned. But and I think our view, without getting into politics, is that he's actually been a very practical, leader once he got into power. I think a lot of the reforms that he's implemented have been sensible, and our view is that, it's going to be a long-term benefit, for the country. I mean, that's the primary responsibility. He's doing things that are good for Argentina, and along the way, I think those are going to help foreign companies invest in the country. So I think our view is that, these are changes that I think are going to be long-term good for the country. I mean, there's going to be ups and downs, and there's, any change. I mean, there's people that benefit from the change, and people who benefited from the previous regime. Like, you're going to see that in any country, and I think you are seeing that in Argentina. Some of the changes, they were pretty drastic, and they've meant that there's been disruption that's affected, a lot of people. They've been tough changes, but he was very transparent about the costs, I think, when in his election campaign. And I think my sense is that people are willing to give him, um, the benefit of the doubt to see how these reforms play out. So, they've been reforms that have changed a system that has been in place for a long time. And at some point, people are going to want to see, that the economic pain that is real, it leads to a long-term better future for people. And I think you're seeing the beginnings of that. But of course, um, you know, we still have to see how that plays out. You can't change everything in a day. But I think our view is that, his popularity ratings are still pretty high, given the dramatic nature of some of the reforms. And I think so far so good, and we're very hopeful, really, for just the sake of the people and the country that we've worked in for a long time, that these reforms pan out and ultimately end up benefiting everyone.
Thank you for your thoughtful answer on that. I know it could be a little bit uncomfortable talking about those things. I just am fascinated by what the climate's like there. So let's talk about NGEX, which we're talking a little bit pre-interview about this, and I think that this is the kind of story that junior mining investors always want to find, and they end up, for a variety of reasons, it never works out the way it does for you guys. As you were saying earlier, this is a 20-year success story from 40 cents to what are we at now? A $2.5 billion market cap. We don't see stories like this very often. An exploration company with a multi-billion-dollar market cap at that. There's probably only a handful of those in the world, I imagine. What's let's start at the beginning with NGEX. How'd you get involved in what were those early catalysts that really moved the dial for the company?
Yeah, no, it's a really interesting story, and I've been involved in the company since we put together the original NGX in 2008, and the original company was an amalgamation of three different Lundin Group exploration companies. It was in the wake of the 2008 financial crisis, and the Lundin Group had, three regional exploration companies that post-crisis just had, I don't know, 5 or 6 million dollar market caps. And it was a good time to just consolidate and kind of sort through a portfolio. So everything was kind of combined into what became NGX. Sorted through the portfolio, decided to focus on what I thought were the best assets, and that was a series of what at the time were early stage projects in Argentina and across the border in Chile. And those projects became the focus of the company. We sold off, all the other bits and pieces that we had in Africa, North America, Mexico, all of the other places that, that we had project focused on South America. We made three significant discoveries: Los Helados, Jose Maria, and Filo del Sol. And as those individual discoveries grew, and these were all part of what's now called the Vicuña District, which we'll talk a little bit more about later, but it's a brand new, kind of the first discovery of a district scale copper district and series of deposits, kind of right in the heart of the Chilean Andes. And as those discoveries matured, we realized that they weren't getting full value, kind of as a portfolio of projects in one single exploration company. And so we did a series of spin outs to shareholders. So the first spin out was a project called Filo del Sol. We spun that out into a new company, new publicly listed company called Filo Mining. And that company was recently acquired by BHP and Lundin Mining for around $4.5 billion. So that was a tremendous success. And that is a success that accrued to those original shareholders of NGX because they received shares of Filo Mining when we did the spinout. Then when our next project matured, Jose Maria, we did a subsequent spinout in 2019. And then that company was acquired in 2022 by Lundin Mining. And then it was subsequently thrown into the joint venture with BHP that now holds Filo and Jose Maria together as a joint venture. And then NGX holds the remaining assets in the Vicuña District. And it's those assets that support our current market cap. And, those are, we'll talk about the significance of those assets, but NGX holds two projects: the original Los Helados project, which was part of those original three discoveries, and then a fourth discovery that's right in the middle, which is a project called Lunahuasi, which is probably the most exciting new high-grade copper, gold, silver discovery in the world, and that's something that's really driven a lot of our share price outperformance over the last 2 years.
So what's the value then if I were to pull up the balance sheet and I looked at the positions that you guys hold in those spinouts, so you guys have a $2.5 million market cap. When I'm looking at that, sorry,
Yeah,
two and a half
so
billion dollar market cap. When I'm looking at that, what would I be looking at the balance sheet and comparing that to in terms of your holdings in those
yeah,
spinouts?
so it's not quite a balance sheet because those are
Mhm.
those were spinouts to shareholders. So
Okay, so those were
NGX,
dividended out.
yeah, dividended out to shareholders. So NGX didn't retain an interest in any of those companies. But if you add up, the acquisition price for Filo, if you add up the acquisition price for Jose Maria plus the current market cap of NGX, that's depending on current market rates, but that's around an 8 billion Canadian valuation. So the way to think about it is that original, if you were a shareholder in that original 40 million market cap company, you hung on to your spin out shares and you sold into these various acquisitions, and then you still held your NGX shares. That's kind of the order of magnitude value creation that was there.
I'm laughing because it's insanity. Like you just said, okay, so I look at the 5-year chart here on Google Finance, I pull up the returns 3,200%,
Yeah, but that's
and that doesn't include
exactly it.
the
it
dividended out assets of what's in one case, one of the most successful mining stories in maybe the most successful mining story in the last few years in junior
yeah, no,
mining.
no, exactly. I mean, that's what's kind of crazy, right? Like I sometimes I have a little bit of a hard time believing it, but the end, the individual share price performance that you just see on NGX, actually kind of understates the long-term performance of that original company. I mean, it's pretty cool.
So, what does that look like here in terms of the assets that remain? You mentioned it. We have the Lunahuasi deposit. Um, maybe let's start talking about that. What can you tell us about the Lunahuasi project?
Yeah, so we have, NGEX Minerals currently holds two projects. Los Helados, which we'll talk about a little bit later. That's a more advanced project. It's on the Chilean side of the Vicuña district. So we'll come back to that. And then we have the earlier stage Lunahuasi project, which is on the Argentina side of the Vicuña district. And, if you go to our website and kind of look at some of the maps, you'll see that Lunahuasi, there's kind of a triangle of three deposits on the Argentina side of the border. Filo del Sol and Jose Maria, which are part of the BHP Lundin Mining joint venture. And then the other corner of the triangle is the Lunahuasi project, which is owned by NGEX. So that's a new discovery. We drilled the discovery hole, which was one of the best holes drilled in 2023, so just over 2 years ago. Um, it's a very high grade copper, gold, and silver deposit. We've since pretty aggressively continue to step out and drill that project. And from that original discovery hole, which was 60 meters of 7.5% copper equivalent, and you can see the breakdown of that on our website. As we've stepped out now, up to a kilometer away from that original discovery hole, we've continued to hit this very high grade copper, gold, and silver mineralization. And so all of that is combined, to create, I think, it's probably one of the most exciting copper exploration projects out there right now. And, that's driven a lot of the share price outperformance and the profile of the company over the last 2 years.
Okay, and then let's get into I believe it's pronounced the Los Helados project. This is on the Chile side of the border. Is that right?
Yeah, and it's an important part of the overall NGX story. So it's only about 10 kilometers away from Lunahuasi, but across the border into Chile. And it's at a much different stage than Lunahuasi. Lunahuasi was discovered in 2023. So we're still in the kind of I guess fairly early in the piece in terms of value creation and in terms of defining that deposit. Los Helados, on the other hand, was discovered, much earlier. We've done a lot more work on it, and it's got 100,000 meters of drilling into it. It's got sort of early stage engineering studies done on it. Kind of a lot more work, done on that project. It's also significant because it's located around 17 kilometers away from an operating mine that's owned by Lundin Mining, jointly owned by Lundin Mining and our joint venture partner at Caserones, which is a Japanese company called JX Nippon. So Los Helados is kind of unique in that it's a very large resource, significant grades, and it's adjacent to existing operating infrastructure. And so, what's really interesting about Los Helados is that, if it has the potential to be combined, I guess if it was acquired by that Caserones joint venture, it would be a really interesting source of long-term feed for that operation. And that makes Los Helados unique because, because it could be combined with existing infrastructure, it could potentially be um, developed for a lot less than a competitive pure greenfields project. And so we view Los Helados as a really important asset in the NGX portfolio and something that underpins our valuation. And then Lunahuasi kind of builds on top of that kind of foundational value that Los Helados gives us.
So I often don't ask exploration companies this because it's kind of silly. But what's your long term vision for NGX? I mean, I know you guys made some massive discoveries. You guys have created. I don't think I could think of any examples of companies who have created more value for shareholders or the last 5 years in Canada. I
Yeah.
I'm stumped, and we follow the junior markets religiously. I can't think of any off the top of my head that have created more value for shareholders than what we just described. what's the long run vision here? Do you plan to remain an exploration company? Or could there be some
Yeah.
production in the future? What do you think?
Yeah, no, it's an excellent question, and it's a moving target, and I think that, one of the keys to the success of NGX and its, spin-off companies over the years has been this kind of constant kind of thinking and rethinking of how, and this focus on how do we create the next increment of value. Like, I think it's really, really important not to kind of rest on your laurels and just kind of be like, okay, we did something smart, we've been successful, now we can just kind of kick back. And, I think that's a foundational aspect of how we think about NGX. And so I think with the other projects, Jose Maria, Fila del Sol, Los Helados for that matter, there's kind of one development pathway there. These are very, very large projects. They're going to require a significant amount of capex. I mean, it's very likely that, the capex numbers for those projects are going to be in the billions. That's something that's pretty difficult for an equity finance junior company to kind of credibly talk about developing on their own. And that's why, the Jose Maria project and the Fila del Sol project are now owned by larger operating mining companies, including BHP, the world's largest mining company, because you need that balance sheet, you need that technical expertise to develop these kind of large scale projects where really they have to be developed at a large scale from the get-go, and that means a lot of capital up front. I think what's different about Lunahuasi and about NGX now is that for the first time, we found a project that could potentially, still needs a lot of work, and that's the caveat. Like, we still need to do a lot of work, but based on what we're seeing in these early days, we're starting to think that, maybe there is a scenario here where a smaller scale, high grade underground mine could be developed here. And what that means is that, it's not necessarily that the ultimate deposit is small, but those very high grades mean that you can potentially start small. So you can start with the kind of capital that a smaller equity financed company can afford, and you can kind of build your way into something much bigger. And that's an opportunity that we didn't have with those other deposits, but it's an opportunity that I think we're starting to think we could have with Lunahuasi. And so where, our traditional business model, and it's kind of like the necessary business model with the other projects was, we need a big partner to develop these. At Lunahuasi, we potentially have, we always have that option. We always have that option to bring in a bigger partner, or to sell out to a bigger partner. But we also have a third option, which is potentially the highest value creating option, which is to develop it ourselves. And that's driven by the nature of Lunahuasi, that those high grades, the fact that it's not a lot of development work to get to those high grades, mean that, it could potentially be developed initially on a smaller scale, which would allow it to be developed by a company like ours. And that's really exciting, and that's something that's really new to this story. Everything else that we found in this district, there was only one way to really go, and that was to go big. Lunahuasi is quite different, and for me, that's really exciting, because value for companies like this is really generated by having as many different options as you can.
So I gotta ask this question because we have a large audience of retail investors, and
Mm.
and I think about this in terms of, if I'm someone who's sitting at home and I'm trying to do my due diligence, look at all these companies and figure out how to beat the market. If I went back and I did a case study looking at your filings, any investor decks I could get my hands on at the time, reading your news releases, basically trying to figure out all the information that was available to the public at the time that you guys started making these big discoveries. Is there anything that you think is tangible that retail investors could learn from that case study of, okay, in the future, if I want to find something that has the ability to get me 3,200% returns, this is what I should look out for? Is there anything you can
Yeah,
think of?
I think so, and you've kind of reminded me of something that I should do. So, NGX won the PDAC Thayer Lindsay Exploration or Discovery of the Year award, and last year in 2024. And as part of that, I put together a speech that that kind of went through exactly that question. And that's something that it's posted on the Lundin Group website. And actually, you just reminded me, I should probably get it posted on the NGX website. But we kind of went through the success factors. And I think, if I could boil it down, it would probably be three things. I think us being part of the Lundin Group of companies ended up being really, really important for a number of reasons. What that meant is that we had a knowledgeable kind of cornerstone investor that was patient and able to finance the company for or at least be the lead order on financings for almost 20 years. Like hindsight's 2020. It's easy to look back now at the value we've been able to create, but there were lots of ups and downs, and there were times when it was much, much more difficult to raise money than it is now. So having that long-term experienced investor that's willing to put their money, where their mouth is and put their money first, I think that was a key factor. I think investors should also really be looking at the track record of the management team and the board of directors. Like, have they done this before? Do they look like they have the skills in the area? Like, are they good at what they do? And I think if you look back, I think we've consistently had a good team, and we've consistently had an extremely good long-term local team in Argentina that has really been a key source of our competitive advantage. Just a bunch of people that really know the country, know how to operate in the country. Um, and then I guess just a focus on value creation. Like at the end of the day, the base of what we do is exploration, and the base of exploration is geology and science, and that's a super important part of the story, and we have to be very competent at that. I mean, I'm an exploration geologist. I have a PhD in exploration, or in geology. The rest of our team are largely geologists, but I think maybe the missing piece at a lot of junior companies is remembering that in a public company, this isn't a science project, it's a business, and kind of always focusing on the business side of things, and how do we turn the scientific knowledge that we have, from kind of an interesting science project into something that, actually creates real shareholder value. And so it's been that combination of the three things. It's been the access to capital that being part of the Lundin Group has given us. It's kind of a deep knowledge of the industry and the country that we're working in, and then it's that focus on how do we turn this geological knowledge and these exploration projects into shareholder value. And kind of sounds simple when you say it, but it's amazing how often those three pieces don't come together.
So it's if I'm a retail investor and I'm listening to that answer, it sounds like essentially what you're really getting at is the f- the first box to check there. Okay, I want to make sure that there's a sugar daddy behind the company who's gonna make sure that there's always a bid there so that it doesn't get totally rolled back and I get diluted, which happens at junior mining all the time. Okay, that makes sense.
Yes.
Then when okay, your next box, you want to make sure that the management team actually has expertise in the area, is kind of how I understand that.
Yeah.
Okay, now the third thing, it sounds to me like it's really dependent on, you're just basically betting on the team that they actually have the ability to go and make those discoveries. It doesn't sound like there's necessarily any kind of like, hey, if I find, some sort of aerial survey of the area that has these colors or anything. It's not that simple. You've just got to trust that you have competent people that have made discoveries before, that are going to be able to go and figure out what they're doing there. If that's what I'm understanding.
I think that's the key. I mean, it sounds like a cliche, but it is about the people, because you're not, they're it really is. This is kind of an experience-based business. And I mean, obviously everybody needs to make their first discovery. But that's, that it's difficult. Then you're kind of rolling the dice in that case. And I mean, you probably need to do, as an investor, you have to take a portfolio approach, and, you do want to roll the dice on somebody that's never done it before, because, everybody needs kind of that first hit. But kind of the more reliable bet is trying to bet on people that have a track record, that are backed by people that have a track record. And that should also be part of a portfolio of exploration companies. And I think a really important thing is that the risk profile really changes with exploration companies in the early stages. And we were at that, when we had that 40 million market cap. I mean, you're kind of one of 1,000 companies, and most of these things don't really work out. Like exploration's a tough business, and of those 1,000 companies, only one or two are going to really hit something that ultimately translates into value. And so you can have the really big hit by investing in those companies, but frankly, it just by necessity, it's a bit of a crapshoot. So things change a little bit. Like once somebody's made a discovery, and they're on to something really good, and we're kind of in that stage with Lunahuasi, where we know we're on to something. Sort of the I mean, it's not that there isn't risk, and there is still a lot of things that need to be defined, but you've passed that first hurdle. You're on to something really good here, and there's a lot of value still to be created. And I think that's something that's really important when you look at a company like ours, which has had really strong share price performance. Sometimes investors look at a company like that and they're like, oh, cool story, but I missed it. But I think it's important to realize that an awful lot of the value is created post that initial discovery. There's a lot of value to be created as you take a project, further down the pathway towards eventual development. And that's kind of where we're at in NGEX. We've passed that initial inflection point. We've made a really significant discovery at Lunahuasi, but there's still a lot to come as we continue to advance and develop that project.
All right, well, Wojtek, we've gone on longer than I was supposed to, but I really appreciate your thoughtful approach to our questions. I've learned a lot from this. I congratulate you on all the success you've had
Thank you.
to date, and as you continue to make some more major explorations discoveries, I hope you'll come back on here and chat with us so that we can learn more about how you made those.
No, thank you. Thank you very much for having me on. And I really appreciate the thoughtful questions. It's easier to give good answers when the questions are good. So very much appreciated.
Thanks. All right, everybody. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this interview, please smash that like button, subscribe, and ring that notification bell. Also, let me know what you think in the comment section. Thanks for watching, everyone.